Marinette Hits Her Head, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina. Chapter 16. Right answers, wrong questions. Marinette was bored. She tried not to be, but after her parents had found her at the door of the bakery, crumpled over and barely able to stand, she had been all but banished to her room and under close watch by her parents and the Kwamis, as they all insisted she needed to rest, which apparently meant cutting out anything other than lying around in bed all day.
"What were you thinking, wandering the streets of Paris alone at night with your head injury? Not to mention memory loss. You could have collapsed in some alleyway and we'd have no clue where to find you," her dad had exclaimed, after nearly smothering her in hugs and rushing to scoop her up as she had predicted. Marinette had hidden a smile at her father's almost accurate words, and her mom quickly came to her rescue by saying, "Well, she's all right now, Tom. Let's just get her to bed." "Sorry, Mama and Papa. I needed a little fresh air, so I thought a short walk might clear my head, but I guess I wasn't ready for it." "Why didn't you use your balcony, dear? You should have told us," her mother chided worriedly. "And at this time of night, too? Are you sure you're thinking clearly? Tom, call the doctor. What was it he said about unusual behaviors?" It had taken nearly half an hour for Marinette to convince them she was fully in her right mind and just acted on a whim. Then Marinette's parents had fussed and busied themselves over her before finally leaving her to sleep. It had been almost a week since that happened, and now it seemed there was nothing to do but sleep and eat the dozens of pastries and meat pies her father tried to shower her with. She was grateful for everyone's concern, of course, and the Kwamis ensured all the food wouldn't go to waste, but she still wished she could find something useful to do. Marinette glanced idly over the homey clutter of her room, then brightened as her eyes landed on the dresser. "Hey, Fluff," she called to the Kwami nearest to her. "Could you grab my phone out of the dresser, please?" "Sure thing, Marinette," the rabbit Kwami replied cheerfully, zooming off and soon returning with the phone. Even though she'd promised Alia to check her phone for messages, the harsh light from many screens had been upsetting her eyes and making her feel more nauseous, so she hadn't even attempted it in weeks, and the Kwamis would merely read and deliver the messages for her if she happened to get one. Now, though, she was feeling much stronger and was suddenly curious to explore this older part of her life, and perhaps sneak a glance at the picture Alia had captured after her time using the snake Miraculous. She clicked open the screen, grateful Alia had happened to know her password, then glared in shock and annoyance as she found another photo of the model boy staring up at her with his infuriatingly perfect smile. Ah, was he everywhere? This was so embarrassing. Marinette blushed and glanced away, glad she hadn't taken out her phone when anyone else was around. What if Cat Noir had seen her with this? It was bad enough when she'd felt terribly guilty over him catching her with the blanket his apparent rival had given her, but seeing some random handsome dude on her lock screen would have surely made him think she was crazy about the guy. Not that he knew she was Ladybug or would have any reason to care, she reminded herself, but there was no way she was going to encourage her former self's obsession over some rich kid when it was the only thing stopping her from appreciating Cat Noir. "This isn't something you would normally do." The words cut through her like a wisp of cold air, leaving her frozen and stiff. He didn't want her to appreciate him, or at least didn't believe she could. Marinette sighed as she replayed the recent guardedness in his smiles, and how much he had toned down his flirtatious teasing from the time she had mistakenly tried to offer him a date. She understood why he wanted to keep a careful distance, and if she respected his feelings, she shouldn't toy with them by offering something that might not last. He loved her enough to wait, and she would have to do the same, hoping her memory-filled self would make the right choice. She glared back at the photo and narrowed her eyes. But that didn't mean she would go along with everything her former self had decided. With a determined huff, Marinette speedily went about changing it, her fingers lingering over a picture of Ladybug and Cat Noir from one of their recent rescues. That was normal, right? To have two city heroes and celebrities on your phone screen? Her gaze wandered over Cat Noir, noting the kind expression on his face and the steady hand he had around Ladybug's shoulder, then shook her head and deleted it. No way. Besides, what if Alia catches her with this? She would never hear the end of it. She switched it to one of flowers, but that reminded her of the ones Cat Noir had given her during the early days of their renewed partnership, and bittersweet tears stung her eyes as she quickly swiped it away. She browsed through the other options, growing increasingly frustrated as nearly everything was filled with cats, bells, emeralds, ice cream, and other things that reminded her of him. Bubbles seemed safe, until she remembered Cat saying they'd been stuck in one.
Marinette groaned in frustration and scrolled down until she selected an image of the city skyline. She leaned back against the pillows, weary from her search and finally satisfied as the elegant rooftops put her at ease and feelings of comfort and freedom filled her head as she drifted off to sleep. 11 days. 11 days since he'd brought Ladybug home and Tiki had kept her out of action. 11 days of solo patrols and avoiding interviews. 11 boring, lonely days when he wondered if things would ever go back to normal. Ninu and Ollie had tried to cheer him up while he was at school, and even Plag said things would all fall into place someday. But at the moment, Cat Noir was filled with a restless energy and weary curiosity, as he wondered just how long his partner would be out of commission, and why there was something bugging him about Marinette's absence that he couldn't quite place. His one comfort was how their hero message alert system had turned more into a text chat, as Ladybug had apparently taken to transforming at home just to check up on his messages, and she seemed to appreciate any means of having a conversation. It was fun to just talk about random stuff, and Ladybug seemed to be much more open over text, or was just going insane from being cooped up wherever she was, which she stated frequently. Cat Noir grinned to himself. He knew he would be itching to get his freedom back too, and he was actually quite impressed and slightly worried that she'd been able to restrain herself from jumping back into the thick of things for so long. Thankfully, Shadow Moth had been almost inactive as of late, aside from one incident with the gumdrop sending monster that Ollie had helped him deal with, and it seemed all they could do now was wait. He sighed and tossed his stick between his hands, checking it once more in case any new messages appeared on it, then went to finish up his patrol. Looked like it was going on 12 days. Not that he was counting. Marinette glanced eagerly over the clock as it finally struck 10. The light from her window had gone dark long ago, making the hours feel even slower, but 10 p.m. was the one time Tiki agreed she could transform to briefly check any messages from Cat Noir, without having to worry about any interruptions. Her Kwame gave her a knowing smile, then faded into a bright pink as Marinette announced, "Spots on." Ladybug smiled as the usual energy flooded through her, and this time it didn't feel draining or as though her injuries were penetrating through the magic. She felt alive and breathed in deeply as a sense of strength and purpose warmed over her heart, and she was reminded of how much she loved being a superheroine. With a super partner. She quickly flipped open her yo-yo and scrolled to see bright green notifications cheerfully greeting her. "Good evening, m'lady. Meow, how's it going?" Ladybug rolled her eyes with a smile. She really should have seen that one coming. She scrolled down through some of the other messages he had sent as he told her about his day, without full details of course, and added pictures of random things he'd seen on patrol, including a ladybug crawling a lamppost and a pigeon carrying a brightly colored gummy worm. Though that last picture was slightly blurry, and she suspected he must have sneezed while taking it. She hovered over the last one, which showed Cat Noir next to the little girl they'd saved the night of the ice cream incident, and between them was a little ladybug doll positioned as if waving to the camera. "Met our little friend again, and she wanted me to send this picture to you." Ladybug smiled as she typed back a reply. "Oh, that's really sweet. So you had a pretty good day?" She waited a moment, her pulse quickening as little bubbles appeared on screen, and she anticipated his answer. "Yeah, it was pretty good. Just wish you could have been there," he replied, sending a small winking face before adding, "I miss you, my lady." "Silly kitty," Ladybug said, shaking her head fondly at the little sad face he put next to it, though a light blush colored her cheeks as she messaged back. "It won't be long. Tiki's making sure I barely do anything, and I'll have my strength back before you know it." She paused, glancing down at the spotted markings of the protective suit she wore to receive his messages. "Or," she typed. "Or?" Ladybug tapped her fingers thoughtfully, knowing the risks and the likely tongue-lashing she'd get from Tiki when she detransformed, but her mind was already made up. A mischievous smile teased across her face as she added, "Or, since I'm already transformed, we could meet up at the Dupen Chang bakery for a late-night snack, and you could see me now." "What? Milady, no! You should be resting." "Too late. I'm already there. See you soon, kitty." She took the tray of pastries her father had left earlier and knew it would make him and a certain cat very happy. Plus, she would sneak a few herself, so it wouldn't be a total lie, and her dad really was the best baker in Paris. She made her way up to the roof and took a seat, pulling out a croissant and closing her eyes as she felt the warm, buttery flavor burst across her tongue, just as a familiar pair of boots landed beside her. "You're lucky Shadow Moth doesn't know you'd risk it all for a pastry. Otherwise, we'd be seeing pastry monsters every day." "Still," he conceded, taking a seat beside her and helping himself to a treat of his own. I can't say I blame you. The Dupin Chang bakery is the best in all of Paris. You should be more careful, though, he added, his voice growing softer as he finished his cookie. I'm kind of worried about you, and I'd hate to see you get hurt again. Ladybug's heart seemed to melt from the sincere concern that filled his features, and she wished she could reach over and give him a hug to reassure him that everything would be all right. But that wasn't something the normal Ladybug would do, and she didn't want to play with his feelings, nor had she missed the ever-thoughtful but painful distance he'd respectfully placed between them. I am careful, she insisted, giving him a warm smile that he soon returned before starting on another treat. Ladybug watched him with a smile, Cat Noir's entire countenance brightening as he munched happily on a muffin, his former worries fading, and he seemed to simply be soaking her company just as she was with his. She wished it could be like this all the time. She admired the confident way he carried himself, while also being compassionate and playful, and how appreciative he was of small things. How could anyone be better than Cat Noir? What do you know about Adrien Agreste? She asked suddenly. Cat Noir nearly choked on his muffin and jolted up with a sputter. Adrien Agreste? Ladybug glanced at him curiously. Yeah, like, what kind of person is he? I mean, I see pictures of him all over the place, and was wondering what he's really like. Have you met him? She finished, feeling self-conscious and somewhat silly. Cat Noir stared back at her blankly. Now how was he supposed to answer that? Ladybug, who had no memory, was basically asking him to form her opinion of himself. Whatever he said next could significantly impact the way she saw his civilian side. Well, he began, stalling for time, I have met him a few times. We're actually pretty good friends. He wished he could erase that last part, since that meant he should know more about himself. Oh, so you get along well? Ladybug prompted questioningly. Yeah, most of the time. Adrien's a pretty great guy. He leaned back in relief, feeling satisfied, but shifted uneasily as Ladybug continued to stare at him, and he realized she wanted him to elaborate. He's really nice. He likes to have fun, hang out with his friends, and try new things. He grinned as he decided to have fun with this. He's really smart, great at school, an excellent fencer, very brave, super funny, and of course, very good-looking. His grin widened as Ladybug's cheeks tinged slightly, and he nodded toward the billboard that was conveniently within view. Surely you've noticed how defined his jaw is, and the captivating quality of his green eyes. Most girls go crazy for him. Ladybug sniffed airily. Most girls go crazy for a lot of things, and for the record, your jaw is every bit as defined as his. Cat Noir chuckled to himself, though he didn't miss the compliment. I guess that's what you get for being a model. Besides, he doesn't really care about that stuff. His voice grew more serious as he went on. Adrien doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life yet, but he does make an effort to help those around him, and I know he wants to have a family someday. His eyes moved to hers as he added, once he's older and meets the right girl. She held his gaze for a moment, then glanced back to the billboard. I would never have guessed that. Most guys who come from a rich background like his don't seem to put much emphasis on caring for others or starting a family. Cat Noir felt his heart sink a bit as his thoughts moved to his father, but it faded as he brushed it off with a confident smile. Yep, he's really down to earth for a rich guy. In fact, Adrien's probably one of the coolest guys I know. You speak very highly of him, Ladybug said dryly, though there was a thoughtful quality to her voice as well. Well, yeah, he and I are pretty similar. Besides, I made the mistake of talking bad about him once, and you made me live to regret that, he added, glancing down with a slight smile. Ladybug raised an eyebrow. Why were you talking bad about him? Is he not as good as you said he is? Cat Noir raised his hands defensively. No, he is a really decent guy. Pretty perfect, actually. It's just, he doesn't always speak up for himself, and sometimes his father makes him feel like he doesn't deserve any friends. What? Doesn't deserve any friends? That's ridiculous, and so horrible, Ladybug exclaimed, her eyes flashing as she turned to glare at the logo sitting in the corner of the Agreste sign. If you think highly of him, then I'm sure he's a great person, and if he's anything like you, he'd be one of the best friends you could have. Cat Noir grew silent, his eyes wide and a stunned expression across his face, before it relaxed into a smile and he stared at her with admiration. Thank you, Ladybug. For defending him, I mean. You always have, and it means a lot to know you care so much. About my friend. Ladybug blushed and glanced away. I mean, I don't care that much about him. It's not like I have photos of him all over my room or something. She cut herself off with a mad chuckle while her brain screamed at her to redirect and gain control of the conversation. I don't even know who he is, really, but I do care about you, she said, turning back to him as she finished softly. You are important to me, Cat Noir. So if you care about Adrien, then I care about him too. His eyes shone as she smiled up at him, then turned out to face the skyline. They were silent for a moment, then Cat Noir asked, Have you had a chance to meet Marinette? Ladybug stiffened. What? Why do you bring that up? Well, since we're talking about random civilians and we do happen to be sitting on her roof at the moment. Hey, I have an idea. Why don't we see if she's awake and ask if she wants to join us? You two have a lot in common, and I'm sure you get along well. Maybe you could even help each other. Ladybug scrambled to her feet and tried to disguise her panic. No, that's not a good idea. Why not? Cat Noir asked, looking crestfallen as he rose to his feet as well. Marinette's probably asleep, like a reasonable person, and I just remembered I have to be getting home too. Nice chatting with you, though. She pulled out a yo-yo and tossed the end out to a random building as she added, You can keep the rest of the pastries. Have a good night. Marinette squinted as bright sunlight hit her eyes, but smiled at the light breeze that tickled her face and the cheerful smell of fresh air. You're sure you'll be all right up here by yourself? Her father asked for what must be the 10th time, placing her carefully in the lawn chair and scanning the balcony for any potential safety hazards. Yes, Dad, I'm fine, thank you. Marinette assured him with a grin. He gave her one last look, then slid a plate of sandwiches on the table beside her and headed downstairs. Marinette shook her head with a giggle, then took a bite of one and smiled contentedly as the hearty flavors filled her tongue. She handed a small piece to Tiki, who appeared next to her, and gazed out into the bustling city. She straightened as a black blur of movement caught her eye. Is that Cat Noir? She moved carefully over to the railing and glanced out to one of the buildings across from her. It was definitely Cat Noir. It was unusual for him to be out this time of day, and he didn't seem to have a specific task in mind as he walked and balanced aimlessly along a loose pipe. Marinette felt slightly bad about leaving him so abruptly the night before, but the question about herself had caught her off guard, and she really had been needing to go to bed. Still, perhaps she could make it up to him now. Cat Noir? Cat Noir! He looked up with a start and tottered wildly for a moment, then regained his balance and swung himself over with a bright smile. Marinette, you're up. It's good to see you. She smiled back at him. I'm feeling a lot better lately, and being in the fresh air definitely helps. What are you doing out here? His face clouded slightly, and he gave a simple shrug. Mostly thinking. Trying to clear my head too, I guess. He winked, and his expression grew cheerful again. Marinette could tell there was more to it, but decided to let it go until he was ready. Wanna come over for sandwiches? My dad made a bunch, and he'll be very disappointed if there's any left on the plate, but I don't think I can eat them all. Cat Noir grinned. Now that sounds like my kind of mission. I'd love to. He hopped over the railing and took a seat on the balcony. Marinette passed him the plate of sandwiches, and they chatted a bit in between bites, while staring out to watch the fluffy clouds passing by overhead. Hey, Marinette, can I ask you something? Marinette looked over at him attentively as Cat Noir grew serious, and he stared thoughtfully at the ground as if debating what to say, then back at her. What's your favorite memory? She blinked and tilted her head, thinking back over the past few weeks, but knew for certain it was one of the times she'd spent with him. It's hard to choose just one, but probably the night you introduced yourself, and I didn't feel as alone anymore. And the way you stared in my eyes and said I was amazing, then carried me to bed, she added mentally, but thought it best to leave that out. He raised his eyebrows in surprise, then ducked his head slightly. You know it doesn't have to be one about me, right? Her eyes twinkled as she smirked back at him. I know, but it's true. He smiled gratefully, then asked, Do you think you'll still remember everything that happened when you get your memories back? Marinette scrunched her nose thoughtfully. I should hope so. I mean, if my memory got better, it wouldn't make sense for it to suddenly block out everything that happened leading up to it. Cat Noir nodded agreeably, and he seemed a bit relieved, though something was still troubling him. Marinette slid closer and placed a cautious hand on his arm. Are you okay, Cat Noir? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just thinking about Ladybug. He sighed absently and twisted the ring on his hand. I know she'll get her memories back. She has to. But is it crazy and selfish to hope that when she does, she'll remember all this and maybe I'll have a chance? Marinette's eyes widened and she glanced down sadly. I don't know. She hesitated a moment, then a warmth and earnestness returned to her voice as she added shyly, but for whatever it's worth, I hope she picks you. Hope and admiration shone in Cat Noir's eyes as he turned to face her. Thank you, Marinette. That means a lot. Especially since I know you had a crush on me at one point, he added with a slightly smug grin. I did? Marinette exclaimed in shock. Well, you said you did, but now you have your Buttercup, right? Buttercup? What kind of name is that? Cat Noir laughed too and held up his arms expressively. That's what I said, but then you got all mad at me. Marinette raised an eyebrow in curious amusement. Wait, when was I talking to you about who I had a crush on? Well, you see. Marinette laughed as Cat Noir recounted the day she'd flagged him over to help practice a confession to the mysterious Buttercup she liked. Her face burned, though she couldn't help giggling as he recited her declaration with a mock earnesty and teasing grin. There's no way I wrote that. You're making this up. Cat Noir drew himself up to his full height with mock offense. Princess, I assure you, I would never come up with words of such radiant poetry all on my own. Oh, stop. It's so horrible. Marinette moaned with a mortified chuckle as she buried her face in her hands. Yeah, don't worry. You realized it then, too, Cat Noir said, placing a steady hand on her shoulder as he knelt beside her. Thank goodness, Marinette muttered from between her legs. She glanced up at him with incredulous scrutiny. How could you even talk to me after that? Did you run away and forget the whole thing ever happened? Cat Noir smiled warmly. Actually, it's one of my favorite memories of you. After that, we decided to take a break and went to watch a movie together, where we talked and you encouraged me, a lot like you did just now. I was going through a lot of stuff, and it was nice to have someone I could talk to who really cared about me. And besides, he glanced down as he added with a small smile, I know a thing or two about doing crazy stuff for love. They were quiet for a moment as Marinette's nerves and embarrassment faded away and was replaced by a soothing peace and light pink across her cheeks. What happened then? Marinette couldn't help asking softly. Cat Noir straightened, his usual energy returning as he replied, Well, then the ice cream guy got akumatized because he saw you and me together and thought we were together, and was mad because his ice cream says Ladybug and I should be together, which is kind of what started the problem in the first place, and yeah. Marinette rolled her eyes. Ugh, what is it with that guy? What's so important about his ice creams anyway? Who's he to decide who ends up with who? Cat Noir chuckled in agreement, though he looked endearingly awkward as he reached a hand behind his neck. Yeah, it is pretty crazy, but the legend is that his ice cream is magical, and whoever eats it with the right person will be in love forever. Marinette tilted her head curiously. And the magic guy says Ladybug and Cat Noir should be together? Cat Noir shrugged. Yeah, Ladybug obviously doesn't think so, and I know it's just ice cream, but it is a comforting thought. Marinette sighed in agreement, then glanced down as she said, I wish I had your optimism. I can't even remember the guy I liked, and I feel like we weren't really meant to be together anyway. What makes you say that? Marinette gave a light snort. Well, for starters, how could someone called Buttercup really be all that great? Cat Noir chuckled, then smiled encouragingly. Well, coming from a guy who answers to a black cat pseudonym, I think you should overlook the name. And the way you talked about him made it seem like he might almost be worthy of you, and would surely treat you well. Really, the 3 suns burning in my heart was enough to convince you? They both laughed, and Cat Noir replied, While I do think your feelings are a good indicator, I know mine have misguided me more than once, and it would definitely take more than that to convince me of his quality. But when I brought you home and we tried to practice again, you said a new confession that was from the heart and really beautiful. For a moment, she was almost certain Cat Noir's face lit up with a light pink, though he quickly glanced away with a soft smile as he said, You talked about how you misjudged him at first, though he was kind of stuck up and superficial. But after you got to know him, you discovered who he really was. You said he was sincere, sweet, and generous. And you sounded like you really loved him. It was so evident in your voice and the light in your eyes, and when I heard that... Cat Noir paused, remembering the awe mixed with a bittersweet sorrow that fell over his heart as Marinette had declared her love for some mystery boy. I knew it wasn't just some simple crush or fleeting thought. You really love him, know him, and whoever it is, he's a really lucky guy. His eyes wandered back to hers as she sat almost frozen, drinking up his words as she took in this new piece he'd added to the puzzle of her forgotten life. After a moment, she smiled slowly. Thank you, Cat Noir. I don't think I'm ready to worry about love just yet, but it's comforting to know that at least my intentions from before weren't completely ridiculous. Cat Noir smiled as he gently took her hand and helped her to her feet. Far from it, little lady. If anything, I should be taking lessons from you. Marinette giggled. Lessons on what not to do, maybe. He grinned as he gazed fondly over his lovely friend, admiring the twinkle in her eyes and the playful twist of her smile, before taking in the vibrant redness of her cheeks and glancing up at the sun in alarm. As nice as the fresh air is, you probably shouldn't sit out in the sun so long. You don't want to get overheated, and I've probably kept you out longer than you intended already. Marinette waved her hands insistently. No, it's totally fine. You're just always so hot. I mean, I'm always so hot. Not that I'm hot like cool hot, but warm. Yeah, very warm, because who wouldn't be after sitting in the sun all day? She finished with a slightly stilted chuckle. Cat Noir raised an eyebrow as he tried to follow the mixed-up stream of words and remained unconvinced that he hadn't kept her out longer than she should have been, but decided not to press the issue. Well, anyway, I should get going. Thanks for the sandwiches. Marinette smiled as she lightly jabbed him with her elbow. Thanks for eating them. Cat Noir bowed with a wink. Anything for you, princess. He swiftly took her hand and gave it a light kiss before leaping off in the direction of home. Anything for you, princess, Plague said mockingly, causing Adrien to blush as he tossed the mischievous Kwame a piece of cheese in the hopes it would shut him up. So what? It's just a nickname, and I really would do just about anything for her. Including giving up your so-called lady? Plague pressed smugly. Adrien crossed his arms defensively. What are you talking about? Plague munched his cheese nonchalantly. Oh, I don't know, just the fact you couldn't keep your eyes off a certain pretty girl and spent the whole afternoon soaking up her company. You're being ridiculous, Plague. Marinette's just a close friend, and besides, half of what we did was talk about my feelings for Ladybug. Are you sure about that? Because what I heard was you recounting a movie date and gushing about how awesome Marinette was, followed by you repeating her love confession almost word for word. What kind of friend cherishes a love confession so much that he learns it by heart? Adrien stiffened uncomfortably. It wasn't a date, Plague. We were just hanging out, and I'm sure anyone who has the privilege of hearing something that special wouldn't forget it so easily. Plague chuckled dismissively. Sure, kid, keep telling yourself that. It wasn't weird to remember a friend's love confession to another boy, was it? Adrien clutched the covers tighter as he stared up at the vast ceiling and tried to rid himself of the annoying doubt his super-helpful destructive companion had placed in his mind. He remembered lots of stuff. It's not his fault he had a good memory. Even his teacher said so. Of course, that was largely due to the amount of repetition his father and Natalie had impressed on him, and while he didn't agree with all of their methods, he now found it very easy for himself to replay bits of information he wanted to remember and hold on to them for later, carefully repeating them over and over so he was sure not to forget anything important. Which is exactly what he'd done after that evening with Marinette. Well, not exactly like that. He'd only replayed it in his mind a few times, for several nights, and maybe occasionally analyzed her words during class, trying to decipher who this mystery boy might be, and if he truly was as genuine as she said. And maybe on really bad days, he would repeat the gentle sentences in his mind and pretend she was really saying it to him. Adrien covered his face with a groan. Okay, so he really was obsessed with it. But it was only because he cared for her, right? He was looking out for her best interests, like any good friend would do, and of course he would remember something that important to her. But why was it so important to him? why did he still remember almost every word? The gentle breeze that blew through her hair and the tender smile on her lips. He thought back to Plag's earlier accusation and paused as he realized it was true. He did know it by heart. He had treasured those words as if they belonged to him, but they didn't. Marinette was giving them to someone else. He'd just been helping, like any good friend would do. Adrien's brows knit curiously as the word friend made his heart twist and left a bitter taste in his mouth. He quickly shook himself out of it. He was glad he could have been there for Marinette, and she had reassured him of his importance to Ladybug, the girl he loved. So why was he holding on to Marinette's confession as if it had been for him? He needed to get to the bottom of this. Adrien moved to sit up, but soon laid back down and shut his eyes determinedly. No, on second thought, he needed to forget all about it. Maybe then everything would make sense. He was about to fall asleep when a new thought came to him, and he realized her explanation was similar to his own experience with Marinette. While he knew they were good friends now, or at least had been before the accident, there was always a deep fear in the back of his mind that she still held a grudge and didn't fully trust him after thinking he teamed up with Chloe to put gum on her seat. His heart longed to hear the same words of forgiveness and acceptance from her, as well as, well, who wouldn't want to know Marinette thought highly of him? To have her deem him kind, sincere, and generous would be the greatest honor he could achieve, and have her be in love with him. Adrien sucked in a deep gulp of air, his eyes flashing open as he tried to erase that thought from his mind. He shook his head irritably and got up to pace by the window. There was no way Marinette could be in love with him. She'd said so herself before, and that was a good thing. If she ever fell in love with him, he'd have to turn her down and break her heart, which would surely break his as well. She was so kind and sweet and wonderful, and the thought of hurting her was almost more than he could bear. Still stuck in the hole, are we? Adrien glanced up to see Plag smirking with a wheel of camembert on top of the couch. Adrien sighed. I just can't stop thinking about it, Plag. You were right. I guess some crazy part of me wishes that confession was meant for me. But the rest is glad it wasn't, because I would hate to turn her down, and I don't think I could bear breaking her heart again. He glanced down with a wry smile. I guess now I have a new understanding of why Ladybug was so bothered when I put her on the spot and she had to reject me all the time. Let's focus on the last part of that sentence. The part where Ladybug has been rejecting you, Plag announced pointedly. Would it really be so bad if you had someone else in your heart for a change? Especially someone who's also in love with you and comes with unlimited access to the best bakery in Paris, he added with a gleeful grin. Adrien stared back in annoyance. Do you always have to make it about food? And yes, it would be so bad. I know Ladybug's rejected me a lot in the past, but things are different now. He felt his cheeks warm as he looked out across the darkened skyline. She really likes me. I mean, you saw the date she made. She actually wanted to be a couple. Only because she saw a sign that put the idea in her head, Plag cut in dryly. Well, yeah, but she wasn't opposed to the idea, and ever since then I've gone out of my way to be a perfect partner to her. Not pushing anything, but showing how much I care. And I know it's a lot to ask, but maybe, just maybe when she gets her memories back, I'll finally have a chance. Which means Pigtails has none. Adrien paused as a weight hovered over his enthusiasm, but he brushed it away with a determined smile. It doesn't matter, Plag. That confession wasn't for me. Marinette likes somebody else, and I hope he sees her for the miraculous person she is. His contented daze was broken by a frustrated howl from Plag, who had buried himself in the edge of the couch. Why me? There's not enough cheese to put up with this. I need socks. Adrien shook his head fondly as the Kwame moaned louder and swiftly pulled off his sock before tossing it at the huddled black lump on the cushion. You're gonna get us in trouble. The noise stopped as Plag narrowed his eyes and shot him a dead stare. Kid, I'm not the one holding the shovel. He grabbed a wedge of cheese, then wormed his way into the sock as he called, When you decide to stop digging and climb out of this mess, let me know. Adrien rolled his eyes as he climbed back into bed, but couldn't help listening as the Kwame continued to mumble. Trouble. You have no idea. Or does he? find out next time, because something big is going to happen. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.